So today we are celebrating Steam Power. Today is March 24th, and a year ago, the book was published at what might be the worst time to publish a book ever. It was 1 week after schools closed here in New York and around the country. I know that the same thing was happening. But the positive thing is that so much of what the book talks about was really still accessible and was working in the pandemic structure. So, you know, like many educators, my school went virtual and we had to adjust. And I think if we were to take, you know, one word and, you know, to look at how teachers had to react in the last year, it's probably improvisation, because it's like we've all, you know, many of us went virtual, and then, you know, we in New York went hybrid, and we actually just at the beginning of March came around and we're fully in person again, which is hard to believe. So we closed schools March 15th, and by March 15th, 2021, we reopened. So today we're going to look at some of the lessons we learned over the last year in teaching virtually and hybrid, and really how that might change education and how we teach. So I think there's lots of positives and some potential negatives that might occur as a result. And we have a panel of educators and people that actually contributed to the book. Let me just share a few details. So, you know, March 11 is when the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and then March 13th is when schools closed in New York and started closing around the country. You know, we're going to really focus on the positives and what we've taken away from this experience, because I think the irony is that I actually probably became a better teacher over the last year. You know, you've needed to find different ways to connect with students and what students actually do. And for me as an art teacher, it certainly gave me license to try new things and experiment more than I ever have. And I was someone that was really looking for license, so it was a really good opportunity. You know, one of the reasons I wrote the book in the first place is because as an artist, I really believe art and design should be part of STEM. So, you know, I was going around and I'm hearing the word STEM all the time. And, you know, I had heard even like big companies like laugh off the idea of STEAM, but like design is so intrinsic in creativity. And so, you know, the book opens with a focus on, you know, why the arts should be part of STEM. And, you know, if you need any other example, Leonardo da Vinci might be the best example, because he's a master of all of these disciplines, and no one asked him to be. Like, it was just a natural occurrence. And it was Albert Einstein that said imagination is more important than knowledge. You know, if you talk to scientists and mathematicians, you know, and which I did for the book, we went to people at NASA and we went to people at laboratories, and, you know, they all sort of agree that creativity is essential. Not just creativity. One of the things I found is that they also mentioned being a generalist is really helpful. So not necessarily being really, really specifically focused on one thing, but actually having the ability to tie different things together is a skill set that's necessary in success. So it was a great learning opportunity for me, and really validated a lot of what we do as teachers, because we have no choice but to learn lots of different things. And, you know, we understand the value of that. And then, you know, also focusing on curiosity and how that ties together. And this is one of the commonalities that you have in any of these disciplines. So let me introduce some of our guests today. So this is a casual conversation. We're going to talk about some of what we learned. And I'm going to start with Shawn Justice, who is featured in the book, and a college professor at Texas State. So, Shawn, what was one of your biggest takeaways from the last year of teaching?
Well, I was thinking about it as you were saying, becoming a little bit more innovative and hoping to be a little bit more innovative in my own teaching. The sense of license, there was that. And guess the thing that for me, the just start off even kind of acknowledging is, you know, how great it is that we're even here having these conversations. One thing that I didn't expect to really, I don't know, I'm really curious. We can talk about this more if it turns out to be interesting to anybody else. But in terms of license, the ability to have a face-to-face, I mean, we're looking at each other's faces to a certain extent. This is a face-to-face conversation. The ability to just sort of have a face-to-face conversation with somebody you haven't seen in a long time or lives in a different part of the country, there's a sense of freedom. As much as it was disappointing to close everything down, there was this unexpected sense of freedom. And I would say that when you were talking about license, that was the thing that I sort of clicked on as a surprise, a little bit of a serendipity thing. And I learned that, you know, the tools, I had been having Zoom meetings for a couple of years, or, you know, Hangouts and so on, but they were always like, well, I guess we should do that. But now that's all we have. But there's something about it that I find sort of freeing, somewhat freeing, especially because we don't have to get in a car just for a meeting. You know, we can have a rich conversation. So that's where I would start. But thanks, Tim, for inviting me to be part of the conversation. I love these kinds of things.
Of course, yeah, and I totally agree. The irony is that, like, I see you guys at conferences, and it used to be just at conferences, and it's really actually nice. I've seen more of everyone. Actually, in a weird way, I feel more connected to people now over the year of Zoom meetings and things like that. You see people actually, ironically, more often. So next, I wanted to ask Sophia. So Sophia, you have a totally different approach because you're a professional, and you created an amazing app. And again, Sophia was a contributor to the book. So if you don't know, Sophia created the Morphe app, which does 3D printing and augmented reality, among lots of other things. So I'm sure this year has been especially crazy for you. What are some of your big takeaways?
It has been crazy, but thank you so much, Tim, for inviting me, and it's great to be with all of you. I think one of the big takeaways is the importance of flexible thinking and just really not being wedded to one particular thing. We created a software that primarily runs on iPads. A lot of schools don't have iPads. And so we really did have to scramble, and we still are scrambling in some ways to see how we can provide access to all of our users. And I think, when you create technology, you really have to think about things like this, because, when they happen, and, kind of just happened immediately, where kids were not even, couldn't take, some kids were able to take devices home on Chrome, but we don't run on Chrome. So we had to think of other ways to, and we do have desktop apps. So we were able to work with a lot of schools still, and, and we are going to be rolling out a browser-based app. But I think the bigger idea of flexible thinking, it is a part of creativity. When you practice creativity, part of it is being flexible and trying out different approaches and being experimental in a lot of ways. And I think that that was really something that stood out for us this year as developers, as designers, and as creators of technology. And we also saw it in the students and in the teachers, because they had to think of very scrappy ways to connect with their students and change around their lesson plans. And we even saw a lot of teachers sort of not even being so siloed into the subjects that they teach, which is really how life is, in a lot of ways. As most people, we use many different skills, not just like, focus in one area in some ways. And so I think this idea of being a generalist, you can also be a specialist, but you should also be a generalist. And that's kind of how we live, because we always have to deal with all sorts of different issues that overlap. So I think that, so that's what we learned this year. And we see it continually being played out among the schools that we're in.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And yeah, I mean, like, that's one of the things that over and over again, it was so much easier to actually connect with other teachers, because you could just add them, it's a matter of a link now. So like you could actually, I had worked with other classes around the world sometimes through these educational programs, but now really every teacher regardless of whether they wanted to be a technology teacher or not, they were all technology teachers. We have, like a sudden enlightened moment. So one of my hopes is that we can continue the push, and that there's not a big blowback in terms of a lot of people talk about things getting back to normal. I don't really believe there is such thing, because I know that like the students came back in person, but they're still on their devices. And I know that, Gene, you've talked a little bit about having that same experience. So let's talk to you next about what some of your takeaways are.
Well, I think one of the things I kind of experienced this last year was, prior to the shutdown, my classroom, my physical classroom, is in this secret hallway at the school, and like no one except the art kids kind of know where it is, and it's like we're this private little club of crazy art people, and it's kind of fun. I kind of get into that vibe, and I'm a quieter person on staff. I'm a leader, but I'm a quieter leader. So having that sort of privacy almost of the art program is something that kind of went away because I didn't have a classroom anymore. And we had so many meetings, like there were just so many meetings where you were face to face with colleagues that you never saw before. So I am inherently kind of shy. So that was, for me as a professional, that was a little weird. It was a little unnerving to be talking to all these people who I honestly don't normally ever see in the high school. We just don't cross paths. So that kind of, we should be collaborating and supporting each other. That was kind of difficult at times because I'm just so used to doing my own thing in my own little hallway. But that being said, the other part that I think was really interesting is I started, at first it was just kind of like fly by the seat of our pants, trying to figure this out. But then eventually it was like, well, how can I recreate that feeling, that community feeling with my students of this is your special place, you're safe here. It's okay to say and do what you need to do to make your art. I understand you guys. And here you've got, you're talking to your kids in a square like this with just a bunch of black boxes with just their name, or they're all still laying in bed or whatever. And it was just, so to recreate community in a completely new way, I think was the biggest challenge of this last year. And discovering new ways to do that, and getting technology to be soft and huggable, all those kinds of things that we couldn't do anymore, because that's a big part of my classroom are those day-to-day conversations. But when I kind of let go of the panic and allowed who I am as a teacher, and kind of was really honest with students and said, I'm struggling here, you guys too, and so like we started doing crazy stuff like, hey, bring your pet to class tomorrow. And so they'd all bring their cat or their dog or whatever, or Friday's a critique day, wear a silly hat for critique, so we started doing things to make that community and that specialness of the online community be part of what we did. And that's when things started to change for me and started to feel like, okay, I can do this. I can do this for a while. So.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something really important, which is that, one of the problems that all of us educators had initially is that, when students are on devices, they tend to just act differently, and like, bringing that sense of connection, that's probably the most important thing we do as teachers. It's like the relationship we have with students is really why it works. And you needed to find a way to kind of, reconnect with students over this virtual environment. And, especially I know so many teachers, I certainly had this experience, we all have our cameras on, but like when students have their cameras off, or, they're doing something else and, their phone is next to their device, it became really, really difficult. So, one of the things I had to do is basically throw away my curriculum and just totally focus on creative experiments and social emotional learning for like 2 months. Like I spent a long time doing it, but I think it was really valuable. And, to be honest with you, grades were less important than they were in the past. So it was really viable And the sense of connection was more important to me in order to, you can't get to the learning sometimes unless you have that sense of connection. And I think that's something that I dealt with too. So how about you, Casita? You had a different situation totally, but what was your year like and what was your takeaways?
So, yeah, so, and I'm an interdisciplinary person or designer, teacher, slash, you know how we all know how to do like all these different things. And yeah, so I stepped away from teaching. I haven't been in the classroom the way you all have been this school year. My husband has been, so I've been experiencing it from his perspective with remote teaching and blended and face to face. I think that, I know that with the beginning of the pandemic last spring, I remember like it's kind of like no matter what you were teaching or what content area, Tim, like you said, everybody was forced to become a technologist, kind of on the go. And I know that for like I depended so much on like learning management platforms, like like Schoology, for example. Like it kept me glued together. So it's like that enabled me to do creative experiments, or you could throw creative prompts out there, and it was just sort of my students already knew how to how they were already familiar with the platform, and so that just made it a lot easier. But yeah, but then there's all these other issues that come up with starting out the school year. So my question, I have a couple of questions for all of you that I'll get to, but I don't think it's easy to transfer a hands-on class to online. So,
yeah, and that actually segues exactly to what we're going to talk about next, which is a little bit about actually doing STEAM in this environment, which is a little bit challenging. One of the things about the book is that there's sections of the book that are not super viable. There's some things that would be really challenging to do in a virtual environment. And of course, I focused, like hands-on making, was really dependent upon the materials you might have at home and things like that. And, one of the things for me that was really tip off in the direction that I would go in was the Getty Challenge, which just, had students recreate artwork just based on materials they had at home. So that was certainly something that kind of gave me an idea of, doing these creative challenges repeatedly. So creative challenges were one of the things that made this transition much easier. So Wednesday, we would do a creative challenge every week, and it would be like, create a self-portrait without using any art materials at home, or build a robot that actually moves out of cardboard, or like these different sort of approaches that were really material based, but you had a lot of flexibility. And those are things that if you were doing it in the classroom, I'd be sweating probably the whole time. But at home, I think students had a little bit more time, and you wanted them to care and be active, so it was helpful. So in terms of STEAM, what was one of your biggest successes as a project, Shawn?
I think the way that we approach it is really important. And so regarding the difficulty of getting, your hands on a tool or within the mud, that could be really difficult if you get stuck on that, because all of a sudden we're all separated. So, oh my God, I can't do anything. So, the Getty Challenge, and there's been a number of fun things. What I try to do, so I teach at Texas State University. It's in San Marcos. I live in Austin, but it's a little bit south of here. And my students are I'm in the art school, the School of Art and Design, and my students are learning how to be art teachers. And so I'm trying to help them. I hope help. They might see it as being just a pain, just being a big pain. But what I want them to be able to do is not get stuck in a particular mindset, and to be thinking about what the learning potentials are of any kind of activity. So to do that, what I try to do is I take this, take the material or take the technology, the tool, whatever it happens to be, and ask myself, why does it exist? Why is it here? What job was it invented, or what job has it been sort of morphed into fulfilling for us? And then when I have an answer to that, it's not a question of having the right answer, but when I have an answer to that, then I try to flip it. So one thing I've been doing recently, and I demonstrate this whenever I get a chance, so I'm happy to thanks, Tim. I'm going to demonstrate it again right now. So we're all stuck, quote unquote, stuck in Zoom, and we're really dependent on these cameras. And the camera sort of, well, what does a camera want? What does a camera do? And so we can talk about that a lot of different ways. But one thing a camera wants is to be sharp, to be clear, to show the surface. So how do we mess that up? So once we identify what it wants, then we say, well, what if I want something different? So what I ask students to do at the beginning of a class or just as a workshop or whatever is to find something on their desk right now and to interrupt the camera with it, to do something with the camera by holding something up. So my mask from today, hold it up. And how would I, now this isn't very translucent, so this creates something entirely different than what the camera wants, but what about something that's kind of translucent or potentially partly translucent? How might that interrupt the what the camera wants? Now, what I try to do from that, and I don't know if this is how much sense any of this is making, but we don't just sort of leave it there. I mean, what I do is I tell, okay, turn off your cameras, go get something, play with it a little bit, and then we're going to turn our cameras back on in 5 minutes. And then we go around, what are you doing? Oh my gosh, that's so cool. What happened? What is that? And we talk about the material. We talk about, then I try, and this is more or less successful. In other words, it's not the same level of success. Where did you get that? Or what made you think about picking that up? And then the next level of that is, so how does that change what we are seeing? How does that affect what we think of you as a person? How does the interruption of what the camera wants, how does that reveal potentially something more, something about you as your personality or about you as your learning trajectory or what you want? And so it can get kind of in a space of, depending on how many people are involved, it can get somewhat, deep. And anyway, hopefully it kind of cascades or kind of, like ripples on a pond or knocking over some dominoes. Not letting ourselves get stuck within any particular mindset and hopefully shake it up a little bit, but it begins with that first question. So I don't know, Tim, I don't know how successful that is. And if any of my students are listening, they might say, yeah, that was just ridiculous, Justice. Why did we do that? I don't even know what happened. But in any case,
just pose it as it was massively successful. That's
yeah, maybe interrupt. I'm trying to interrupt the default is the way I think of it to myself. Figure out what the thing wants, what the tool does, and then figure out how to work with the tool to make something that neither one of us expected.
Shawn, it does sound, or
Yeah.
it does actually sound from what you just described. It's almost like you gave your students, like a step, maybe a STEM type of approach, with the assignment where, yeah, maybe you were on camera the whole time and they were given, some criteria to work with, right?
Mm-hmm,
and they could go search around their house for something. And so that's, so that can turn into, something interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. And Jean, you said just about, get a funny, wear a hat or build a hat or build something out of it. Yeah, so I think that's kind of a similar trajectory, perhaps.
What many of us kind of allude to here is really having a sense of play digitally. And I think that was, for me, like one of the best experiences I had during this. I've been in more webinars than I've ever been in my entire life. And it's like, there was something called Playfest from the group that did OK Sandbox in Minnesota, St. Thomas University. So, and they just introduced all these different ways of sort of playing digitally and like learning and connecting. And sort of like, Jean, you mentioned at some point that like, you were a little bit shy, and then like this was a difficult sort of transition. I totally relate to that. Like I'm, digitally outgoing, if that's such a thing, but like in person, I'm much less outgoing. So, I was thrown into rooms with people I'd never met before from different places. And it was like, it's an interesting experience. I love, connecting with people. So that was really beneficial. And it's the kind of thing that you would never do normally. And Sophia, you have like a totally different perspective because you created these tools and then you got to see all the cool projects that people do with them. And like, if you haven't seen make sure you check out the Morphe Instagram page. It's pretty amazing on Twitter and Instagram, but like seeing all of these different projects that people do that are really, it's interesting to see the same tool used in so many different ways with different projects. And I think you came out with an AR phone app, and like right at a good point in time too, because we use that a lot. So what were some of the responses you got from teachers and some of the projects that surprised you over the last year?
Well, thank you for your kind words, Tim. We saw, so our software is a 3D design software, but it's a software that can be used to create 3D models for a lot of different things. And I think it wasn't always intuitive to a lot of teachers and a lot of schools that you can use a 3D model for all these different purposes, from 3D printing to augmented reality to virtual reality to game design to animation. And even among the students, students were even surprised once you have a 3D model that you can actually try to animate it, ungroup the parts and start to play around with it, or place it in AR or even render it, which is, I don't know if you all use rendering software, but make it look photorealistic. So you don't even have to think about printing. So because a lot of schools that we were dealing with globally were not open, and kids were learning remotely, 3D printing was a bit out of the question because they didn't have access to these 3D printers. So they started to play around digitally with all sorts of things. A lot focused, and it was interesting, Shawn, you when you were talking about your project that was like almost like a self-discovery project. We've seen a lot of those, and I think part of that, the reason for that, is because number one, it engages the students because they do want to explore self, and they love taking selfies. They love playing around with creating characters either loosely based on themselves or based on someone they know. So we saw a lot of designing self-portraits, just using lines and making them 3D and placing them in augmented reality. I don't know, Tim has a really amazing series that he did at ISTE maybe like 3 years ago, was it, Tim?
Oh, yeah.
Where he was just drawing people in the audience as he was speaking. And I'll share them with you after this, but it was people did very similar things where they started to play around with lines and started to rotate them and just place them, and not even think about 3D printing them or rendering them. So you have something that almost looks real, even though it's just a render. And you could put different textures on it. You could put images, you could put videos. So I think that people felt more free to explore the digital side of art. And I think that that is so powerful because, ultimately as technologists, we're a small team. I started this software back when the iPad first came out in 2010. I started thinking about it. We didn't get the app out until 2014. Now we're in about 126 countries, and people are using it in ways I never thought they would use it. But what is really interesting is to see how people are extending it digitally. And it's not just about making a physical object or printing a physical object. It's really more about all the different ways you can play around and visualize your ideas, because we created the software to be able to be a visualizer. Because personally, and I think it is my life's work, I feel that visualization is a life skill, and anything that we can do to help people, and not just students. We have adults, we have professional artists, we have engineers using our software. Anything we can do to help them visualize their ideas in ways that are interesting and different and easy and accessible, we want to do. So yeah, we saw a lot of digital projects, and I can kind of I can share some links after this. So you guys can get a sense of how people are using it. And it's not just our software. Really, any 3D design software can be used in these different ways. It's just figuring out how to connect the dots. And that's part of our job as educators, even though I'm kind of an honorary educator in a lot of ways, because I do speak to a lot of the students and to the teachers as well. And sometimes, we do trainings with teachers. Anything that helps connect the dots among 2D and 3D, and also, among all these different technologies, they all work together, and they're all interdisciplinary. So,
if I could just add to that, I think that one of the things that we played with all year, and even we're still playing with, because I'm teaching and have been teaching hybrid since the beginning of the year, So I always have kids who are virtual, but I also have kids in the classroom at the same time. Um, is that idea of there isn't one tool and there isn't one way to use that tool. There
Yeah.
are many ways to use many tools. And so as a teacher, sometimes I would get all wigged out that I have to be able to know all of the software, and you really don't. You know, you really don't need to know all of it. You're going to find a student in your class who is probably better at it than you because they actually have the time to play with it. And in a way that is important to them. And so that's one of the things I've learned is to really embrace letting students become sort of the teachers in a way and almost creating like this kind of competitive challenge type atmosphere where, hey, you guys, I found this app. What app can you find that can do this too? Or did you know you can use Procreate to do animation? I didn't know that, you know, things like that. So that constant dialogue of, you know, how are you using it and what are you doing? And I think being virtual, you know, I started enabling my students to be able to share their screen so that they could be the ones to say, well, you know, I found this app, it's called Photopia or Photopia or Photopea, however you say it. If someone knows the real pronunciation, please let me know. It's kind of like the GIF thing, but anyway, you know, and then they turn around, they start sharing what they found and what they tried to do. So I think creating that sense of sort of competitiveness to discover new things and inviting the kids into that learning process of they're not just the learners, they're the teachers. And I'm not just the teacher, I'm a learner too. I think that, you know, what you talked about with the Morphe app and all the different ways you could use it. I think that as an educator, you have to be open to all the possibilities. And I love when students figure out a way to use an app how it was never intended to be used. It's kind of fun, you know, and I love stuff like that. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you need to be brave as an educator and just kind of, I love starting a year wanting to do something and having no idea what I'm going to do and how it's going to work. And saying to the students, all right, we're going to figure out how to make an app. Like I've never done it. I have no idea, but a 7-year-old did it on TED. So it's possible, you know? Yeah. What were you going to say?
That's how life is evolving anyway. I mean,
Yeah, it's so true.
it's, you know, people who thought that they had this certain job, that job is not really their job anymore, and they have to do all these other things. And so whatever we can do to contribute to the, you know, this new generation that's coming up to be able to think, you know, flexibly, quick on their feet and creatively, you know, that would be a wonderful thing.
And Sophia, I have to ask, how did you decide, like, what is your background with education? Like, I'm just wondering, like, did you go to school? Or if you went to school, did you go to school for like graphic design or industrial design? Or
No,
like,
no,
I went for fashion design.
no,
And
actually none of those things.
yeah, oh, exactly. So, but then you took the, you know, you took the path that you took. And would you mind talking about that?
About this? I'll tell you, I could give you like the quick summary. So
Okay.
I had a very different life. I worked on Wall Street. I had a very corporate life. I have many degrees that, all of which I still use, but in a very different way. Both graduate degrees and my undergraduate degree. I was always drawing and creating, but I sort of went the corporate route because I had other interests as well. So I was working in India and Africa and different places when I started to think I didn't want to do sort of corporate investment stuff anymore. I really wanted to do more. I wanted to do stuff in product design. And the iPad had come out, and there was really nothing to do on it in 3D. There was maybe one. No, I don't even think there was a software when I first started the idea. And then I was always sketching and drawing. Of course, I could do like Photoshop, Illustrator. I was an illustrator, not professionally trained. And then I just decided I was going to make this. And so I got a team together. We're still working together, like, 7, 8 years later. And we keep evolving the software. And we didn't design it for schools. That's why it's not like we didn't start on Chromebook. We started on the iPad. So we really, and it's kind of interesting when I'm probably, it's safe to say I'm here because of an art teacher and a geometry teacher in high school. Because while I was thinking about my next steps to, what I was going to do after I left the corporate world, I went back in my mind to the two subjects I loved the best, and it was geometry and it was studio art. So this is a combination of them both, but in ways that still surprise me. So that's my background.
So we have a couple minutes left. I want to talk a little bit, and this is just open to everyone, just about where moving forward, like what some of the things we're going to take forward from this are, and sort of like what you could imagine. I mean, like predicting the future is, senseless. That makes, I couldn't even predict the next month, after teaching this long. But some of the things that, you hope may happen, and some of what you're going to move forward and how you've changed. So that's kind of open to anybody if anyone has any ideas. I could say personally that, one of the biggest changes I think for me is that, I always tried to be maybe innovative and approach things differently, but like the license that this gave me during this period of time allowed me to go way further. I mean, one of my dreams was always to go to a situation in a school where you had total freedom to do anything, and to just go off the rails. And I always kind of leaned against working different subjects because I think that art could be a part of everything, and so could science, and and really that approach is fairly new, and it's part of the Industrial Revolution. And but I didn't realize, I think, how much of a traditional teacher that I still was in some ways. And when you get rid of the classroom, it really teaches you like to break things down and start from scratch. And it gives you the ability to actually build stronger sometimes. And I think that was one of the benefits. And my relationship with students certainly got stronger, and giving them even more choice, because like as a teacher, I always supported the idea of choice, but really working with them in actually creating curriculum and deciding what we're doing, and in really full partnership, I think, with students, and that's really manageable because across the board, they had tests canceled, and there was just a less of a stress put on grades. So a lot of that, the motivation for working for good grades was gone. So like, you had this lull shortly afterwards where some people that were really just doing the work for grades suddenly weren't doing very much work. So it's like, well, what are you interested in? Like, what would you like to do? And sort of approaching it that way. And, kind of like this webinar being more conversational was really helpful, and working in partnership with students. So what's some of the approaches that you guys would take forward?
I one of the things I enjoyed, it took a while to enjoy it, but I really loved truly hearing my students' stories. And I always thought that I was a pretty good teacher who listened to their stories. And but once you are meeting like this, face to face, one-on-one for 5-10 minutes at a time with every single student every couple of days, suddenly, it's like, wow, like I'm starting to know you as a person way quicker than I ever would. And there's some kids who kind of hide out in your classroom and you never really do hear their story. So I enjoy the fact that I've gotten to hear more of their stories and make those connections. And the other big thing I think is that our district has really tried hard to hear our stories as people, not just as teachers, but as people. And that staff wellness has been at the forefront of how our district has chosen to approach everything. And in turn, that has trickled down to student wellness. And so I hope that we keep thinking about those things. And I hope that we keep having those conversations and keep being concerned about people and not about processes and not about structures, but about people and their wellness, because it's really important and you can't really function if you're not well. So
Yeah, I think in addition to technology like social emotional learning or mindfulness or whatever you want to call it, just really caring about mental health and those sorts of issues was probably the other biggest change. It's always been important, and the social emotional program at my school kind of changed the whole way that I thought. And you're totally correct. I think that that stress on mindfulness and social emotional learning is a major thing that I really hope we stick with, because it changes the environment of the classroom and the learning and the people. I think, as a teacher, we all know what it's like to burn out. And as a professional, probably doubly so, Sophia. So I think that making sure you're managing your time, and in this crazy time with so many of these online meetings and things like that, giving myself to take a 10-minute walk was one of the most important things that I chose to do every day. So I was scheduling time to make art and scheduling time to just take a walk without a cell phone. Yeah.
For me, that's something that is my hope, or my, well, I hope, because I think of it as a redistribution. Basically speaking, an hour is 60 minutes for all of us. And, but it's what we do with those 60 minutes that really matters. And there's something about the way that these tools have given us an opportunity to rethink what we do with those 60 minutes. Now, I think one of the hazards of this is that we get stuck pretty quickly in the current moment, the current instance of these tools. But these things are changing drastically every day. I mean, with this, we can now choose our own breakout rooms. We can move each other around on the screen. I mean, there's so many platforms now. There's so many. I always do Zoom through another platform. We open up Zoom through Miro or through through Google Spreadsheets, or and those opportunities give us a way to create this intimacy that Jean is talking about. For me, I would like to see, and I really hope that some of these changes, we're right on the threshold perhaps of redistributing our energies around higher ed and K-12 in a way that's going to make the entire system more human. And I've been thinking about this all the time, as a educator, as a, university person in education. I guess that's what they pay me for. So I guess I have to think about it. But I love thinking about this, and I'm really interested in how we can reshape our society and our schools if we take this opportunity to redistribute the way we pay attention, and not get stuck within these tools, not get stuck within this very current, very, very brief, short time where these tools look like this.
It's a good point. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think that technology changes so quickly these days that you never should be too dependent on the technology, but what you're doing with it and the ideas behind what you're doing with it are really solid. But I love your whole approach of sort of being playful and playing with different ways of the wrong ways to use the technology and that sort of hacking mentality. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope that wellness stays at the forefront. And yes, I mean, I think we've all probably experienced burnout, right? Even if whether it's like something we're kind of bragging about in a weird way, or whether it's like, oh my gosh, but I mean, I have wondered, I mean, I've just imagined how the constant and continuous state of stress that a lot of teachers are dealing with. And I do think technology, I think this whole experience has pushed students to become more self-directed, which is and teachers, which is good, which I think is a good thing. I was wondering, I mean, with Shawn, with what you were saying, I was wondering, how has it been for college professors? I mean, the strain of, I mean, because it's a little different from K-12. And I was curious about how what that pipeline, what I mean, was affecting, students, with
Right.
being admitted into college or, entering a certain program. But
Well, I mean, definitely it's a big issue that we're talking about in a lot of different ways. And I don't want to, pretend like I could speak for a variety of people other than my own experience has been that the job requirements have gone through the roof. We have to do everything like 5 times better. And most of my colleagues were never prepared for this at all. So the level of stress and anxiety has been just rocketing. The other thing that's changing is that drastically, probably faster than we might even know, is that we are becoming irrelevant. For example, there's way more algebra instructors than we need in this country, way more basic writing instructors than we need in this country. And the way that this might shake out is that students are going to choose among universities who offer cross-curricular credits remotely, because the vast majority of what we do that counts as college level learning doesn't need to be in person. In fact, with parking and with those weird hours in between seminar courses and all of that stuff, it just doesn't. And so now all of a sudden, every single creative writing professor, every single math professor, everybody all over the country knows how to do this online. And the university structures that enable that are going to find thousands of students, thousands. And the universities that insist on going back 100% in person potentially are going to lose. So you heard the stats, I'm sure, that 60% of United States colleges and universities canceled spring break. So what did the kids do? They went to Florida with their laptops. And I bet you, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of those kids on the way back home, they're saying, wait a second. I'm going home to sit in my apartment when I could be staying here on the beach. You know what? I think I'm going to choose my classes for the fall based on what are online. Oh, your university doesn't have any more online classes because we're all back in. Well, wait a second. I think that there's an opportunity here for redistributing the way we pay attention that is might, like I'm predicting the future, Tim. It's an opportunity for re-envisioning what we do. Now, the pain of that is that the schools, if that were to happen, the schools that decide they're not going to go back, they're not going to keep online practices anymore. There's the possibility that a lot of students are going to flood really good teachers who have really good online courses, and the folks who got stuck in a place where they had to teach on, they're going to find there are 2 kids registered for your fall course. Well, I guess we're going to cancel the course. Well, wait a minute. My health insurance depends on me teaching this course. So that's going to be a very, very painful switch, but universities are financially in very precarious situations. So I think there's an opportunity, but I think it could potentially be very disruptive.
Yeah, I think that a similar thing sort of happens at potentially the high school level and K through 12 too, just because, virtually you could have a lot more students in the class and you don't have to worry about class size and you don't have to worry about some of these restraints, and you need fewer teachers, right? So like, it's in terms of classroom management, and a lot of those decisions you would never want to make, but budget might necessitate some of those as we are dealing with all the costs related to COVID and schools having to invest in technology and getting less aid potentially because so much of the money was invested and things like that. So we just have a minute or 2 left. I just want to give anyone a chance to share. And
I was
it was
just
a
going to
pleasure.
add,
Yeah, sure.
that goes kind of back to what you said at the beginning about being a generalist and being like a Leonardo da Vinci, or a Renaissance man, where, we've kind of had to become jacks of all trades. And that idea of being departmentalized is going away. And this new structure kind of opens things up. And if you're a district and a school system that can envision the future as not the art department and the math department and where these people are intermingling, and helping each other and supporting each other, I think that this could be a really revolutionary thing, and schools could stop being factories and start really being about education. I think it could be really exciting.
I totally agree with you, Jeannie. I feel that that's our natural state. as people. You know, that these compartmentalized structures are they could work from some management perspective, but from a human perspective, we don't operate. Our brain works, in wondrous ways. I think that in some ways it's going back to the way we really were. And it took COVID to do that, maybe? I don't know. I do think, though, one thing that we didn't really touch on is that some people have thrived in this environment of remote. And it could just be, there are a lot of factors that affect that. Certain students prefer, maybe because they've grown up online, in so many ways. Or some people who have more introverted personalities. I know, for me, I've been working online for a long time because our team is, spread out. And so I think that there are some benefits to it too. It's just really figuring out systemically how this is going to work so that, everyone benefits and not just certain people.
Yeah, so true. There's so many students that I have that did marketably better during this virtual learning aspect and do not want to come back in person. You know what I mean? Like, so, we're still teaching relatively hybrid, even though we're back fully in person because many people decided to stay online and they had that option. But yeah, I mean, like, I think that you need to be open to flexible learning environments. And really it's about people, and, that's the way education should be. So I thought what Shawn said is like, there's sort of a revolution in education that's been long coming. That's probably this may have helped to push us in that direction. So it's going to be really interesting. So like, it's been a crazy year. I could only imagine what the next year or two may look like as we come back. But I want to thank everyone for attending and for being part of this. It was great really talking to everyone. And I would have to share a slide for the book. So you can still get a copy of Steam Power at ISTE. And thank you all so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today. And if you're not already, make sure that you check out. We're going to share the video and we're going to share links to all of the speakers and some information they share after this as well. So stay in contact and hopefully we will, this will be the first in the series of ISTE Arts PLN webinars. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's great. Thanks. It was fun.
Good to
And
talk with
thank all
everybody.
teachers, all of you.
Guys, have a
Spring
good one,
break
guys.
starts Friday. Spring
Oh, you
break
too.
starts
Yeah.
Friday. Yay.
Cheers.
Hey.
Perfect.
That's
And
awesome.
more.
Take care.
Hang in there. All
I'm
right.
excited.
All right. So shall we say goodbye? Are you?
Absolutely. There we go.